Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. We are going to go live in a room, and I'm going to invite some people to join me. We're going to invite Mina. We're going to invite Christine. We're going to invite some new friends that I have made, some new and old, some folks whose work I have really respected in this world. And we're going to talk tonight about a lot of the reasons why therapy, as it's currently constructed,
We're here!
Yay!
We're here!
We did it!
We did it. My Instagram does not like me
Yes.
today, but it is okay. We're not gonna let this stop. Thank you, everyone. I remembered a lot of your screen names, and I see y'all came over. Thank you so much.
Yes. Could you remind us about the comments tonight, Christine?
So tonight, we want to make sure that we keep the comments nice, clean, respectful, loving. This is a safe space, and we're going to be sharing about different conversations. And this is not a therapy session. We're going to be talking about different conversations on breaking the stigma around therapy. So keep it loving.
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
So we are here to talk about therapy, to highlight In Treatment that is going to be going live this Sunday on HBO Max. And so let's kick off the conversation.
Okay, the question that I really was dying to ask you all tonight, I think that the four of us come from really different therapeutic niche specialties and expertises, right? And the question that I think is really interesting that I wanted to hear from each of you is, what really eye-opening thing have you learned or gained or insight from like your own work in therapy, whether it's with clients or a therapist? Anyone? What's like the most eye-opening thing that you have taken away from your work in therapy as a therapist or as a client?
I can kick it off.
Please.
Christine Gutierrez here, live from Puerto Rico. my one of the things that for me was really eye-opening was just being able to witness what happened when I was in a safe, consistent space. I grew up with a lot of trauma. There was a lot of abuse, and I didn't have consistent safety. So having that modeling for me in therapy was huge. And I got the opportunity for my nervous system to rest and really just feel seen and heard and validated. It was such a, it was and is, because I still go to therapy, such a healing experience to be able to witness what happens in safety, how we unravel and how we get to express ourselves.
I love that. I think for me, and I resonate so much with that, for me personally, I think what was so resonating about my own experience, because I've gone to therapy and even being a therapist, is how much we truly have the tools within, and we truly know what we need to feel safe, to be supported, to take care of our mental health, to tend to our well-being. And because of different things that happens in life, we often look outside of ourselves for the answer. And I think my process in therapy has helped me really look inward and reflect on my own abilities, because one of the most powerful things that I've learned is the ability to trust myself again. And knowing that I am deserving of wholeness, and knowing that I have the innate ability to know what my body needs and what my well-being needs to be supported and whole. And this is why when we talk about therapy, it's like therapy is not about giving advice and you all or people showing up to the therapeutic room and therapists telling you what to do and this is what's right and this is what's wrong. It's about guidance, so that you can recognize you actually have the tools. You harness the power that you need to better yourself. And that's what really, really resonates for me.
So
Mina, thank you.
Mina, could you tell us where you're zooming in from?
I'm in New York City. I'm in Queens. Let me be specific. I'm in Queens, New York, y'all. I'm in Queens.
I knew you needed that opportunity. I just had to give you a
Yes, yes. What about you two?
Thank you,
Melody,
Mina.
please.
Woo, a little bit nervous. I'm Melody Lee. I am on the land of the Jumano Nation, Tonkawa tribe, Coahuiltecan Nation, also known as Austin, Texas. I love what you shared, Mina, about how we already have what we need, that we embody um, tools for healing. And that reminds me of also how so many of our wisdoms and strengths and resilience and healing is also ancestral, that they were passed down from generation to generation. And I have a lot of honor for my ancestors. And I think a powerful thing that I learned in therapy, and really this is upon reflection after going through school to become a therapist, is as I went through school, I learned about diagnosis. I learned about all these individualized ways of thinking about therapy, that which is essentially trying to figure out what is wrong with me or what is wrong with a person. And I started to think, to question that and go, certainly there's more to healing than diagnosis and to solve. And so that what you shared about studying those tools really resonated with me. And through therapy and also expanding learning and community, I start to learn about the impact of historical trauma, of intergenerational trauma, and also what is perpetuated systemically, especially
Mm.
how that, systemic inequality, oppression, violence impacts people with marginalized identities and bodies. And recognizing, oh, so it's not just me, that when I enter into a space that is primarily white and I'm nervous and I feel anxious, there's nothing wrong with me. That
Mm.
actually these are systemic issues that is impacting how I feel in my skin and how I feel in my body. And so when I started to have more of these dialogues in community, that was healing for me too, to number one, not feel alone, but also to find resource in one another. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah.
Sonali, how about
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. Oh, honey, I've got so many insights that I want to share with you all. And the word that I'm hearing in all of our narratives tonight is healing justice.
Mm,
This idea that we already have the tools within us
yeah.
to heal ourselves, and that we often need someone to walk along the path alongside us, to like support us, help like offer us some like respite while we're figuring it out together. Hello, everyone. If this is our first time meeting, it's lovely to meet you. My name is Sunali Rashford. I use they and he pronouns right now. I'm going through gender confusion, so if they change, please don't be alarmed. I'm known as a fat sex therapist. I am Instagramming, living in from Philadelphia, also unceded Lenape land. And my biggest insight from therapy also comes from reflection. My deepest, most important therapeutic relationship that I've been in recently ended a couple of
Mm,
months ago. And it was with a white therapist who I gleaned so much from. And like, she was so helpful for me in many ways as an anti Zionist, queer, fat Jewish woman who was a mother. And it was incredible for me, and I still needed a safer space because what I had learned in that reflection and all that time with her was that everyone in my life, even my clients, offer me a mirror to show me aspects of myself. That like the way that I'm in relationship with my best friend, my sister, my cousin sisters, my family, my clients even, that like I'm seeing every single person offers me an opportunity to see parts of myself that I like might hide or I might feel shame about or I might be having trouble accepting. That's been one of my biggest insights, like seeing conflict as opportunities, seeing relationships as mirrors.
Mm.
so
I,
beautiful.
I love that. As we navigate this conversation, too, everyone feel free to answer the questions that we ask each other in the comments. We want to hear from you, too, because this is a cultivated conversation amongst all of us who are live today. So
Yeah.
we would love to hear what's happening for you all as well. But thank you, everyone, for what you shared. And we unpacked so much that it brings up this question too around like stigma and how stigma is generally specific to a cultural stigma. There's stigma in the Black community. There's stigmas in so many different cultural communities, and there's so much to unpack around that. And Melody, I would love to hear like your thoughts around this concept. I know we've talked about it before, and if you can just enlighten us about what you've noticed around cultural stigma and ways we can all start to reshape that, especially for people who are from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mina. I appreciate that invitation. Whew, this weighs a little bit heavy on my heart, especially as the escalation of anti-Asian violence continues, and seeing that our communities are grieving, we're in pain, we're also in fear, and on top of that, a lot of times. Um, Asian, but also I'll speak for myself, East Asian communities also get blamed for not going to therapy. And the blame often sounds like, well, Asian culture stigmatize therapy. And so therefore it becomes something that is put on us. And so whenever I hear about cultural stigmas or that culture stigmatizes therapy, I usually push back and I said, who stigmatized whom? How did this stigma originate? And so I often just go give a little bit of their story lesson. I don't say history anymore. Their story lesson, and about the roots of so-called Western and so-called modern psychology, and how it is rooted and founded on a lot of white supremacist ideology, which limits not only accessibility of care for communities of color, but also um, makes us feel like we don't belong, or
That's
that
right.
our methods of healing, that our ancestral wisdom is somehow wrong. It is not
Mm,
scientific
mm-hmm.
or
It's too mystical and
It's too mystical,
mystical.
too shamanic,
Uh-huh.
too weird.
Uh-huh.
mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. And so upon rejection or neglect, then of course our people were going to stick together and say, we're going to take care of ourselves. And it is actually threatening sometimes to enter into therapeutic spaces, which is why it's so, so, so important to find therapists that are culturally responsive, culturally affirming, and also have done their own internal work in dismantling white supremacy ideology, not only in their practice, but also in their relationships, and entering into a decolonial mindset. So, um, therapy is for everyone, meaning, that we all know how to heal. And how can we cultivate spaces where we can not only heal among one another, but also learn from one another and the cultural strengths that, other folks bring as well.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so powerful. And Melody, I just have to say, like, thank you for sharing that, because something that I just had an aha moment about is that it's so easy to follow language narratives of saying the same thing over and over again, right? So for myself, being a Latina woman, being like, oh, we have so much stigma in our community, and that's why we don't go to therapy. So even deepening that conversation, because one of the reasons why I started doing more what I call spiritual therapy, combining more spiritual, non-dogmatic spirituality with modern therapy, was because I saw a missing link within the community that I was working with, within the Latino community. And it wasn't as warm. It was lacking a warmth, is the best way to describe it. And a lot of times I saw that as not being clinically sound, or not being a good enough therapist, because in our colonized version of therapy, there is more of that coldness. And so in a way, we end up feeling like we're not being the therapist we need to be. And then on the other side, we're not allowing ourselves to honor the medicine of our lineage, because the word psychology actually means the study of the soul. It doesn't mean the study of the mind, it means the study of the soul. And so I remember when I when I learned that from Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes from her book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, I was blown away. And I said, wait a minute, it felt like it was just a study of the mind, but this is a study of the soul. This is an ancient art of both science and a deep unfolding of holding space for someone's journeying. And in many people of color traditions, backgrounds, we know that intuitively, but we've been told that it was wrong. We've been told that it wasn't therapy. And so thank you for that reminder, because that just added a depth to what I will respond with now when we talk about this moving forward.
Yeah. It's so much to unpack, and I love what you both just said. Because one, I hope the takeaway that people can gain from this too is like, this is not stuff that we just woke up one day and said, therapy isn't for us, right? This language has been passed down in how we internalize things. And to speak for me specifically to people in the Black community, there's this heavy idea of there being stigma around mental health. And I always say, Melody, like, put with that pushback, where did this stigma come from? When we think about our grandparents, our great grandparents, our ancestors, they had valid reason for not wanting to seek mental health care, medical care, because it wasn't safe. We have to remind ourselves that when we think of mental health is tied to medical health. And the medical industry was not designed for anyone who was not white, right? And so the experimentation, remember within slavery, Black people weren't even considered human. We were considered 1/4 of a human being, right? And so we were experimented on. All of these things happen to our bodies, to our minds. And when we learn about our history, it makes valid sense for why great grandma was teaching her children that medically going to the doctor, going for a checkup, taking care of your mental health. We don't do that. We're not going to the white man for care, right? And so there's valid reason why great grandma would feel that way. And then we start to think about intergenerational trauma, how behaviors, ideologies are all passed down. But as Melody said, it turns into this language that makes it seem like we're oppressing ourselves. And we have to learn to liberate ourselves from that. And that's the practice has been for me, to recognize that my people actually have valid reason to be afraid to go to therapy. Honestly, even in 2021, you know?
Right.
And so I think when we learn about, and I don't know, I can't remember the word you said, Melody, but now as soon as I said the word history, I'm like, I don't want to say that anymore.
Lesson.
Their
When
story.
Their
right,
story.
Their
their
story.
story,
I
right,
love that.
and we learn about our ancestors. We learn about our family lineage that a lot of us have actually been pulled and stripped away from. Then we get a better understanding of what it means to take care of ourselves. And this is why I think sometimes too, in certain environments, it feels like certain things don't work for us, because when we tap into our own ancestral healing, we all have these different practices, but a lot of the time, wellness is very white centered. And white centered practices may not be the thing that works for you as someone who is BIPOC identifying. So I love this direction of the conversation, because I hope this normalizes just a better understanding of the oppression that we all have faced, and how we can now liberate ourselves from it and push back against it. But just remembering too, it's not an us problem. We didn't create this. We're not the reasons why the world is the way it is, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that when we can recognize that, that in itself is therapeutic and healing.
Yeah, I so agree. And I would recommend to anyone who is a queer or trans person of color, Black, Indigenous person of color, to recommend that if you're going to seek out a clinician and you're really wanting to make sure, does this clinician, work with carceral structures? Will they call the cops if I'm feeling suicidal? These are really important questions actually to be asking and challenging clinicians now in 2021, right? Because in 2020, Summer of Rage, we were talking about defund. And I don't think clinicians as a group, if we've been talking among ourselves about how we can also divest from carceral structures, because that's another reason why we have not been, or the history of the profession has not been a safe place for people who look like us and come from legacies that we have ancestrally. So definitely recommend three important questions that you want to ask, right? Like, what's your relationship to capitalism? What's your relationship to policing and prisons? Um, and are my identities safe here?
Oh, my identity safe here is powerful. I think that's one of the questions that we were looking at was, how do you know when you found a good therapist for you,
Oof.
right? Because so many people
Feeling.
ask that. How do we know? So maybe we can just start off, Mina, when looking for a therapist for yourself, or just in terms of tips for people that are seeking or wanting to seek therapy but not really sure of what to look for. How do they know that they found a good therapist for them?
Hmm, this is a really good question. So, I mean, we can unpack this, right? I think safety, going back to that word, is probably going to be my theme for the night. Thinking about safety in the room. Therapy
Mm,
is designed to necessarily be a safe space for your healing journey. And when we think of safety, we also think about the different aspects of what is needed to nurture and cultivate safety, which is a non-judgmental atmosphere, a reaffirming and validating atmosphere, an atmosphere that is not necessarily quick to pathologize every single parts of you and all of your behaviors, but recognizing the humanness, your humanity, a space that also can accept all the intersections of your life, because we all may have touched upon our culture and our race, but we're more than that, right? We have so many other intersections. And so we want to make sure that our therapist is affirming that. I also think that you get this gut feeling,
yeah,
that
It's a
like your
feeling for sure.
it's
intuition
a
kind
feeling.
of does, right? Your intuition just kind of tells you, like, my therapist is dope. Like you have this innate feeling that this is my person. And I think that finding your person, whether it be outside the therapy room when we cultivate connection and care amongst community, is also included in that when we're seeking therapy. I think sometimes signs that you should pay attention to is this saviorism complex, where maybe your therapist feels like they're here to fix you, they're here to save you, they know better than you do, they are gaslight, right? And unfortunately, I'm sorry that these things happen, but they
Yeah,
do, which is why we're here having this conversation with you all, for you to know that you are deserving of a very safe atmosphere, especially an atmosphere where you are investing your time, your energy, your vulnerability, and your money.
that's right.
So I want people to just know that trusting your gut as well. When you know that a connection is right, you instantly feel it. And if you notice there are red flags, it's okay to take a step back from that therapist. You don't have to continue to see them. You can terminate your session. It doesn't matter if it's the second session or the 15th session. You are not obligated to stay with your therapist the whole entire time. So those are some things that I would look out for.
And
But
if I
what about
can,
you all?
I want to read aloud this one comment here on the bottom. I
Yeah,
bet you all can see it, right? Like, gut feeling is our intuition and is also our ancestors celebrating our choices.
oh,
Yeah, it feels like
Ooh, that
divine
gives me
alignment.
chills,
chills.
chills,
Divine
chills.
alignment is
Wow.
like the universe telling you, honey,
Mm.
that parking spot came at exactly the moment that you needed it because I'm looking out for you. I
I
Yeah,
don't
and
know.
love
What
I
do you
that.
think?
Thank you for sharing that.
that is so beautiful. Thank you. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight what you said, Mina, was being able to know that just because you are healing doesn't mean that you don't know. And we said this earlier. We know inside, truly we know what is right and wrong for us, though we may have impaired our intuition due to earlier childhood trauma or experiences. We part of therapy and part of trusting, and even on the journey to finding the therapist, is repairing our intuition, is remembering those kind of feelings inside, and knowing that just because someone is quote unquote a therapist, it doesn't mean that they are better than. There's this typical hierarchy that happens often in this more white centered therapeutic system that we're in, and we want to make sure that we find a therapist that doesn't make you feel like there's a hierarchy, but instead sees you as an equal, values your intuition and your judgment, and is simply holding the space to be able to listen to your story and guide you to connect the dots in your own past, in your present, and guiding you to your future. So being able to know that you advocate for yourself, and if you need a script, you can say in the first session right away, you can say, I want to give myself an opportunity to go through a couple of sessions to see how I feel, and I will let you know if it's a fit for me. Because sometimes we need this language or this script to empower ourselves to say, here we go, this is my boundary, right? You get to set boundaries as well. And remember, therapists are people. And so making sure that we are empowering you on your journey to finding a therapy is really important, so you feel safe and seen, and that you know that you're in charge of yourself too. You get to advocate for yourself.
Speaking of, we got a comment in the chat box. Where do you recommend looking for a therapist, Melody?
Ah, put me on the spot, and I love it. So I co-created a community called Inclusive Therapists, and it is a simpler, safer way for people with marginalized identities and bodies to find a therapist that is culturally responsive and is social justice and liberation oriented. And we actually go through a pretty intensive process in vetting the therapists that come in. Folks have to either dialogue with us, write an essay to share about how their intersectional identity informs their work, and also what their journey is in decolonizing and in liberation. And which, thank you for inviting me in. And Christine, I'm really connecting with what you're saying about the hierarchy, because in capitalistic white supremacist based therapy, the hierarchy is really important. And the hierarchy is also very harmful. It assumes that the therapist is in a position of power, and one way that that power is maintained is this false idea that the therapist is a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that I, as a therapist, I am unbiased, and I'm here to hold up a mirror, reflect back that my identity does not play an impact in this therapeutic relationship. And
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, in what relationship does that actually exist, and why do we make an exception in a therapeutic space? And so in looking for a therapist, and so I welcome you to seek a therapist and to do this through Inclusive Therapists too, please know that you have the power to interview your therapist. That you actually get to ask your therapist what their values
That's
are.
right.
And also, if I may take it a step even further, it's what their journey has been in dismantling oppressive systems, in dismantling oppressive ideologies. What has their healing journey been like? Is this a person that can meet me where I am, and also potentially even guide and inspire me in my journey? And so you have the power to interview your therapist. And transparency, when the therapist is transparent, that is one way to flatten the hierarchy. And so if a therapist is resistant, they're like, oh, this is not about me, this is about you. Question: in what relationship is it only about one party? And what is that really about? It's about maintaining the hierarchy. And so thank you for inviting me
And if I can
to
shout
share
out
that.
one more directory, I want to add on the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. It is an incredible place to find a clinician of color who is also queer or trans.
And what's Dr. Joy's as well? She has the
Therapy for
Therapy for
Black
girls.
girls. Yeah, awesome.
Amazing directory.
Therapy for Black girls.
Well
Amazing.
Yeah, so there's so many, and what everyone just shared is so like, Melody, thank you for unpacking that. And also just thank you for creating that, because it's one of those things where we are going to be the ones to liberate one another. And this kind of brings up a question I have for you all about the power of community care. Because I think sometimes when I hear people talking about therapy, sometimes we hear these terms that around like what self-help actually means, what does self-healing actually means, and I find that we live in a culture that honors independence over interdependence. And the more that we become disconnected from others, the more we actually are feeling the weight of depression, anxiety, all of those different things. And my foundation is I teach people how to cultivate self-care through the lens of boundaries and community care. Because in every relationship, we need boundaries. We need to learn how to be assertive and teach people how to be in relationship with us. But there's no time in history or life, let me reframe that word, in life that we will never be disconnected from one another. So we have to learn how to be in community, but community, even when we think about the cultural aspect of how important community is for so many people. So I just want to know for you all, what does community care look like?
I can kick it off and then we can keep flowing. So, I mean, I think that such a huge part of my business, because I have integrated now more as a, my background is as a licensed therapist, but infusing that with being a guide, right? A mentor, and giving myself the freedom to work in that way. And a big part of that is the community aspect of what I create. And the reason for that is because when we hear other people's stories, we heal. And when we see people that sound like us or look like us or that can identify with us, we know somewhere deep inside of us something shifts, and we remember that we are not alone. And some of the biggest feelings of suffering, of pain, of depression, of isolation is that we feel alone, or we feel like we're the only ones that have had that experience. We feel bad, we feel unsafe. And I specifically work mostly with people that identify as women that have gone through trauma, verbal, mental, emotional, physical abuse, and that are really looking to, as I say, come back home to themselves, to love themselves, to be able to feel worthy. And one of the biggest things, that the takeaways that they always say is, well, being able to hear their story, I was able to own my story because I saw love. I saw that she was strong. I saw that they were strong. And I was able to take myself out of that situation and say, okay, I am that too. I can get through this too. And so community for me is medicine for the soul. It's what we need. It's what allows us to thrive. Even right now, us having this conversation, I'm so nourished because this is our way to gather and to feel connected, right? Like that's one of the biggest protective factors that we have against depression and anxiety. This is a powerful way to cope, is by sharing our stories. And it's really ancestral, as we were talking about. Sharing stories is ancestral.
Yeah, I think about disability justice. One of the 10 principles of disability justice is interdependence, that we need each other.
Mm.
And I think about that when I remind myself that the opposite of addiction is connection,
Mm-hmm.
and that I can't heal without possibility models, that I never could have become the fat sex therapist if I didn't have people like Lindy West and Samantha Irby and Leslie Kinzel and fat role models who offered me the opportunity to see someone else who related to their fat body in a totally different way, so that I could run, right? They walked so I could run.
Mm.
Thank you, Sonali, for sharing. And the thread that I'm hearing is the power in storytelling and in relating with one another with lived experience of not having to explain oneself or to educate others on oneself, to just be with one another and to connect. And I reflect back on my culture, like what is important, what does community look like in my culture? And I'm from Hong Kong, and food is a huge part of our culture, and coming together and sharing food. And I think that's common and throughout so many cultures of nourishment of the physical self, but then through conversation and storytelling, it's nourishment of the soul, of the spirit, and how gathering through food is we do that when we celebrate. We also do that when we grieve and mourn. And in the same way, these rituals that has not only fortified us, but also has helped us, survive and thrive through really challenging things like that. It's kind of going back to yeah, what our ancestors did. And there's this sharing, may I offer you some? Oh, and then also receiving, and that practice, kind of how do we welcome that warmth, that familiarity in the therapeutic space? So that's kind of how I'm feeling right now. I feel like we are kind of sharing and nourishing, and I'm like,
It is
feeling
food
that
for the
in my
soul.
body. Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm,
this in itself is community.
Yeah.
Even for the folks, for all of you who are joining, I see all of the comments you're leaving, and like, this is what community is, and we need that. And I know it's been really hard over the last year and a half to um, seek connection, especially physical connection, where we can touch, hug, just be amongst one another. But I think even showing up online, showing up on FaceTime, FaceTiming a friend instead of calling them, setting up that Zoom with, a Zoom party, something as a way to continue to be connected in a time when we feel like a lot of things are not in our control. What do we actually have in our control that we actually can do, right? How about someone be the person that I'm going to order food for everyone, and then we're all just going to show up on Zoom and just chat with each other, right? And have dinner together. We may not be in the same physical space, but we're connecting in some sort of way. And I love how Melody said, like, food is so vital, I think, in every single culture, and how we connect over food, how we connect over that as a healing practice is just so, so important. So I love all the different perspectives you all shared. And I want to kind of go back to, because I also saw a lot more comments around therapy and like finding a therapist and stuff. And one of the things I would love for us to touch upon is like, this idea that sometimes people feel like they have to wait until there's a crisis to go to therapy. And I would love to unpack that. Sonali, do you want to unpack that for us? Like, start off the flow for us. Like, what does it look like for us to shift the mentality of when do we actually set that appointment with the therapist?
I know for me, I personally struggle with this as well. So if this is also you, please receive this message as balm. But sometimes we need a consistent person in our corner who's going to offer us non judgmental, unconditional love, positive self regard. And sometimes when we're only reaching out for that in crisis, it's the subtle way that we tell ourselves, I don't really deserve that unless I'm like, oh, screeching, burning, hot, sharp, hot for it. And when we can offer ourselves permission to have access to it all the time, not just an emergency, it is such an important message to offer to, like, I know for me as a child of immigrants, as an immigrant kid who's like still struggling to reach out and ask for help when I need it, it's this like small reminder to myself that I'm worthy of support, and it's okay to have it all the time, even when I look happy and the weather is nice and I'm feeding myself okay. What do y'all think?
I love that, Sonali. And I think that I love what you said about the subtle ways that we tell ourselves that we are not worthy, right? And being able to know that we don't have to wait till we're suffering to get help. And this is huge because I think I'll speak for myself as someone that has gone through abuse, that I had a higher tolerance for pain because I was used to it. And so navigating what is actually a safe level of discomfort that's not actually this scorching heat and suffering and level of discomfort or anxiety that I would let myself get into, and really understanding, right, and checking in with my body and saying, okay, what am I feeling right now? And giving myself permission to get that support before it gets there, and turning down that volume on how much we let ourselves suffer, and instead focusing on how can we create a life where we set it up that we can thrive, right? Where we're not just looking to say, I'm only going to go do this when I'm in suffering, but how can I do this even when I'm so happy, even when I'm grateful? Because in this way, it's more of a daily maintenance. And for me, this mental health maintenance is really important, especially if you know you're the kind of person that's more sensitive, if you're an empath, if you've gone through a lot of shit in your life, you're the kind of person that's gone through those things, then I can almost guarantee you that it's going to be better to have someone consistently there where you can share in a safe space. So I always tell people, for me, I know that my go-to is making sure that I have that person, that therapist in my corner. And also, obviously, because I hold space for so many different people's emotions, I want to make sure that I'm a solid container to be able to process my own feelings so that I can hold space to hear people's stories and to do so because I'm taking care of myself and I'm leading by example. So definitely, this is really, really important question. Thank you for asking this.
Thank you, Christine, for sharing your story as well, and I hold that with care. And that resonates with me too around this bearing of pain and building this resistant or resilience, and being able to say, actually, I'm deserving of care too. Which actually reminds me of a question, which is, what would you say if a friend came to you and says, whether I'm in crisis right now, or I'm not in crisis, but I am just needing some extra support and I'm considering going to therapy. Well, how might you dialogue with a friend that came to you asking that, might be seeking care? You know what would
As
you
the
say?
therapist
Oh,
in most of my friend groups, I'm like, thank you. I'm like, oh my God, thank God you have come to this realization as well, that you're ready for someone else to hold you in this like super vulnerable, and it's a privilege to be that person to the people who I love most. It's an honor to reflect back the golden nugget, honey dripping sweetness part that I love of them most. It's a pleasure to do that work for them. And it's hard as a clinician who like does that for pay. So I'm like, yes, how can I support you in this? Can I help you find somebody? Can I send you some directories? I support you. And let me know how I can support you in it. So I often will approach it with curiosity.
Yeah. And always reminding too, like therapy is, everyone is deserving of it. And so being able to support someone through that process. And I think I get the unique advantage because I am a therapist. And as Sonali said, like I'm the only therapist in my friend group. So but I find it comforting in a way so that when they have concerns or questions, I can say to them, like, well, ask your therapist this, or maybe check your insurance panels and ask your insurance panels these things. And a lot of us don't have access to someone with that level of insight and education. But I do think that when we all do the work, going back to community care, how can we show up for people who are suffering and are in need? And maybe they are in need of someone who can help do the research, help support in some sort of way. But I do think that it's really powerful in those moments to let people know too that they're deserving of care, which has been a huge theme we've been talking about, and you don't have to wait until the crisis happens. I'll even suggest it sometimes where I notice there's some conflict or I notice there's some tension. Do you want to talk to someone about this, and recognizing it's not like a judgment, it's just out of concern, but also like compassion, right? Because again, normalizing that this is just something that we all are deserving of. And yeah, I just think that when we can cultivate that for the people in our community, that we'll see a ripple effect of many different communities coming together and recognizing the importance of caring for ourselves before things get to its worst point.
yes, when we heal, we heal in relationship with one another. Also,
That's right.
that heals our communities as
That's right.
well. And the ripple effect. I feel that. And as I'm hearing you share, Mina, I'm reminded that there are also many forms of therapy, that one-on-one talk therapy is only one form. There's also group therapy, for example. There is therapy in nature. There's therapy with animal assistance. There's movement therapy,
Cat, we have
music
cat.
therapy, art therapy. There's some animal assistance right here, and there's so many forms of therapy to explore.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, Melody, before we wrap up for today, because I want everyone, I think we all want everyone to know that we are talking on like the talk therapy traditional sense, but there are so many mediums, like you said, the art, the animal, even body movement for people who,
Absolutely.
especially if you have trauma and how trauma stores itself in the body, finding someone who engages in somatic therapy can also be very, very helpful as well. So remembering too, like it's not just like a one-way shop, like a dead end. Like if I don't do this one thing, then I can't get the support that I need. There are so many different things. But because we are pretty much near the end, and I don't want Instagram to like cut us off, I want to thank all of you. Thank you,
Mm.
everyone, for even being in this space. But Melody, Christine, Sonali, this was such an amazing
So beautiful.
conversation. So beautiful. Thank you all for the nuggets you shared. I really hope that you all walk away from this with education, insight, but even excitement for the next chapter of your life. And knowing we're all here to support you, please follow all of the amazing people who joined this live and helped to educate you, but also most importantly, make sure you tune in on Sunday, this Sunday coming,
Yay.
to HBO Max for the premiere of In Treatment.
Yay.
And let's
So
continue to
excited.
normalize this conversation, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Therapy is for
Thank you.
everybody if you want to be in therapy.
Hope to be in community with y'all again.
Yes.
This will not
Yes,
be the
yes.
last time we
For
see.
sure.
It'll be the last one,
For
y'all.
sure.
Thank you for sharing with us through all the tech stuff. We made it through.
We
Tune
did.
in on Sunday, and thank you again so much.
Abrazos. Bye, everyone.
Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you.
XOXO. Gossip Girl.